Thank you all for attending this, the Life Science Forum. We're really excited that it came together. I'm really excited it came together. We have a wonderful panel of speakers for you this evening. We also are on BCAT Facebook Live streaming right now. And this is recorded by BCAT. They will be showing it over the weekend. We'll provide some scheduling once we know what the scheduling is over the weekend and up to town meeting. So tonight, this panel relates to the amendment in the warrant for Article 2. However, the focus of the forum is really going to be what is life science, who's here, what are the companies here, what are they doing, who else is in the region, what is the market, what is life science looking for when making a location decision, what are the impacts of the life science industry, and we'll be focusing on that this evening. For the bylaw amendment, I wanted to point out first that the bylaw amendment is not allowing anything that's not already allowed today. It is, although clarifying life science as well as adding additional definitions and use table clarifications and providing a dimensional and parking criteria that's more in line with the densities that we're seeing for life science being less of an impact than a traditional office. So with that, I want to open it up and introduce the speakers. All the way to my right, we have Dr. Parsons from Edward Parsons Consulting. He's also our new member of the Zoning Bylaw Review Committee and a resident of Burlington. We have next to him, we have Mr. St. Clair, who's a managing director and head of acquisitions and development at Spaulding and Slye Investments. We also have Dr. Auclair from Northeastern, director of biotechnology and bioinformatics, as well as the director of biopharmaceutical analysis training laboratory. That's a mouthful.
It is.
And directly to my right, we all know Dr. Ed Weiner, who is a veteran member of the Board of Health, over 30-year member, also has served in the life science industries in both working with AstraZeneca Pharmaceuticals as well as teaching at UMass Lowell. So with that, I wanted to give the panel just a few minutes to introduce themselves and kind of talk a little bit about what their relationships individually are to life science. And then I'll begin kind of moderating the panel with a few questions. We'll be running between 6 and hopefully 7 for the panel discussion, and then open it up to the audience for questions. So with that, I'll start with Dr. Parsons.
Should I introduce myself?
Sure. Just a little.
I'm Ed Parsons. I am a trained physicist, and I did academic research and studied engineering and physics, and did a lot of research in medical imaging, and found my way into the biotech industry. I moved to Cambridge to work for a biotech that was using imaging, and learned a lot about the regulation and the development of pharmaceutical products. And I think that's very relevant to the industry, which is very interdisciplinary and brings in a lot of different technologies. Today, I advise small companies on managing the transition from a science project to a marketable product, and I've worked for a number of early stage companies in that capacity.
So Daniel St. Clair was Spaulding and Slye Investments, so I run our acquisitions and development work across the U.S., and we do a lot of work here in the Boston area. Actually, the roots of our foundations as a company are here, and we've been involved in a variety of mixed-use projects in the greater Boston area and elsewhere, but one of our areas of focus and expertise over the years has been the life science market, or what we now call the life science market, lab buildings, biotech and chemistry. We've had the good fortune of developing and owning and operating buildings in Boston, Cambridge, inner and outer suburbs, and we see a huge opportunity in the market for how the industry has evolved from a cottage industry 20 or 30 years ago that really saw the science coming out of the institutions as a seed for something that could be taken usually somewhere else and developed. And now we've got an industry in the greater Boston area, really anchored in East Cambridge, but with a strong tentacles to all parts of our greater Boston market, where we are the global leader, and we see these little companies have been consolidated and have evolved in a whole ecosystem of business, and biotech has developed around them, and these companies are vertically integrating and have created a market that even in 5-year increments, it's just an astounding level of change. So the biotech industry is here to stay. I think it's a matter of whether communities want to lean into it and participate, and how much they can participate, and really understanding where they sit in that value chain. And I think Burlington has huge, huge opportunities. So it'd be fun to see you take full advantage of that.
Thank you. Dr. Auclair?
Great, thank you, and thank you for having me this evening. It's great to be here. I'm an associate teaching professor at Northeastern University, both in the Boston campus and here in our Burlington location. I direct the biotechnology program and bioinformatics, both separate programs. Those are largely based in Boston. My work here in town revolves around the Biopharmaceutical Analysis Training Lab, which is a globally recognized training facility that we use to train regulators around the world, really on characterizing medicines and ensuring that those medicines that hit the market are both safe and effective. And that's what we do both in Burlington, and I travel internationally to all continents except Antarctica, promoting that mission. My background is protein biochemistry. I studied HIV and Lou Gehrig's disease as a grad student and a postdoc. To sort of echo Daniel's comments, I think that the biotech industry might seem like it's an older industry here now, but it's just at the beginning. I think with the new advanced medicines that are coming online and the increase in manufacturing that we're going to see in the state, and bioinformatics and data in general, there's going to be a really huge evolution in medicine from treatment and prevention to real traditional cures, and Massachusetts will lead that charge. And I'm excited to be involved and see where that goes.
Thank you. Dr. Weiner?
My name's Ed Weiner. I think I know pretty much everybody here. I have a very diverse background. I have a PhD in biological sciences, primarily hematology. I'm a medical technologist, a registered medical technologist, a certified clinical laboratory director. I served as a tenured associate professor at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and served as a clinical laboratory science graduate program director. And then I moved on to the private sector, where for the last 25 years or so, I've been a medical science liaison and a director of medical affairs for more than 25 years in total, as director for 20 years. Tonight, I'm serving as a consultant. The Board of Health, where I have served for 30 years in this town, that is my love, will formally discuss the support of this warrant article next Tuesday at our regular meeting, and I just want to invite everybody to come at 7 o'clock at the Board of Health meeting, and you're welcome to chime in. With me tonight is the Director of Public Health here in Burlington, Susan Luminello. Please raise your hand. And Environmental Engineer Kristin Mathis, and I'll refer to them later on this evening.
Thank you very much. And as you can see, we have a tremendous panel and wealth of knowledge, and I'm so pleased that you all were available. I'm so pleased we've had the opportunity to talk as much as we have coming up to this panel, and that you were able to be here tonight to help enlighten all of us in Burlington. And my hope is that this is really the beginning of a much bigger conversation about life science and the life science market, and really what's emerging. I mean, as mentioned by Dr. Auclair, we're just at the beginning, and I think we're seeing changes in so many aspects of life science, but we're also seeing a lot of changes in the retail markets and the office markets, even as people live. I mean, everything's changing at a pace that's so different and much faster than it has in the past. And from a municipal perspective, municipalities are often, it's just by the nature of our systems are very slow to react quickly if we need to. And I guess that's slow to react quickly, but we are. And in order to keep the momentum going that we've been able to have in Burlington, from really the beginning of the turn of the century and the construction of 128 and the military R&D and in the 80s and 90s with technology and Sun Microsystems and Oracles. And also through the mid-2000s when we realized that, in order to keep this momentum going, we needed to add different amenities to the town, and we saw major changes and policy changes with Third Avenue, as well as the district and some other areas in Burlington to bring in the diversity and amenities that needed to keep, our commercial sector vibrant. And as I mentioned earlier, that we do have life science companies in Burlington, and I hope to talk about them as we begin discussion. But one of the things that we've been noticing is we've been getting calls. Well, Millipore landed here. We had expected kind of Millipore would be the next Sun. That Millipore's here, all of a sudden it would be, life science in Burlington. And we really didn't see as much of that as we had thought we would. And in researching our communities around us, as well as just kind of where industry's going, and we don't want to miss the boat, I guess. And I think and it just as said that, Boston's the epicenter for life science right now, and it's a growing industry in Massachusetts. We're seeing traditional office kind of level off a little bit, and other things kind of level off, but this is not. And, I think it's important for us to understand, and we'll hear from all of you this evening, as to kind of where we need to be, what we need to do, what is it that we're looking to change, what are some of the hurdles that we have in place here that's kind of creating some obstacles for life science technologies coming into town. So with that, I want to start, first I want to recognize also the audience and the planning board members that are here. We have Chairman Kelly, we have Member Gaffney, we have Member Cavino, who's way in the back, not in the front. We also have Senior Planner Josh Morris and Assistant Planner Liz Bonventry. And many of our business community is here, and Rep. Ken Gordon is here, so thank you, and I hope you can join us in continued conversation here. So thank you all for being here. So with that, let's kick it off with Dr. Parsons. What is life science?
Life science is, it's not particularly rigorously defined. I often talk about biotechnology and biotech companies. I think those terms are largely synonymous. But life science in an academic sense is a little broader and more theoretical to encompass all biological-based technologies. And in terms of the economics and referring to an industry segment, it's also, it's been used recently to broaden the term a bit to include companies that aren't necessarily in biomedicine, because there are companies using the tools of biotechnology, and the idea is to also make industrial materials, to do testing, to make agricultural products, to do environmental engineering. So there's a lot that goes into it, and there's and it's a very vital area of our economy. It really refers to a broad scientific trend over the past few decades, and it refers to an industry segment. I'll fill you in with some more history and statistics I think are relevant to start. Biotech as an industry started in earnest in the 80s when some smaller companies like Genzyme and Genentech and Amgen and Biogen with eponymous names using some genetics technology, started to discover drugs in a new way and displace some of the R&D that large pharmaceutical companies were doing. And today still, the bulk of the activity and the bulk of the economic activity is related to healthcare and medicines. I would include, though, in life sciences a lot of associated industries that support it and which it supports. Some do biology, laboratory-related stuff, and some don't. There are contract research organizations that do outsourced basic applied and clinical research. There are clinical data service companies, bioinformatics, computer hardware and software companies, also computer image analysis, diagnostics, R&D tools, reagents, genetic and genomic and proteomic analysis machines and systems, all sorts of laboratory equipment and supplies. All of those industries exist in Massachusetts because of the biotech industry. And I think at its root, the biotech industry is big in Massachusetts because of the universities and the hospitals. So to give you some statistics on the industry, in Massachusetts, there are about 70,000 jobs related to biopharma. That represents about $10.5 billion of wages. So this is high-value stuff and a big part of our economy. Biotech R&D jobs are about half of that, 35,000. And per capita, that's far and away the largest in the nation among all the states. Biopharma manufacturing is about 10,000 jobs. Massachusetts is up there, but it's far less of an emphasis. There's more emphasis on R&D because of the universities and hospitals. The biggest concentration by far is in the Cambridge area. Massachusetts has, again, by far the greatest per capita NIH funding in the country. Massachusetts hospitals receive 57% of all NIH funding that goes to independent hospitals in the country.
Wow.
Massachusetts biopharma companies, these are early stage companies coming out of universities, receive $3 billion a year in venture funding, and it's the largest concentration for that in the country. Another $500 million goes to other life science companies that are not necessarily involved in biomedicine. So that's a 6-to-1 ratio, and so you can see the focus in medicine. And lab inventory in Massachusetts in the last 10 years has gone from 17 million to 29 million square feet. So there's a lot of lab activity. 10 years ago, we were talking about disaggregation of pharmaceutical companies when I was studying the industry. And a lot of pharma companies were spinning out or divesting from R&D and allowing these small innovative companies coming out of universities to do that R&D function for them. But what's interesting is, meanwhile, a lot of these companies were setting up independent entities, but still part of their company. In Cambridge, a good example is NIBR, the Novartis Institute of Biomedical Research, which is a huge facility, which was placed right in Kendall Square to try to harness all the energy, all the brains that are coming out of the universities in the Boston and Cambridge area. And many other companies have established a foothold in Cambridge as well, and many have bought out biotech companies in the area, but remained in Cambridge so that they can establish a research facility and harness all the activity that's going on. So how do we get more activity in Burlington? I think we have to plant the seeds, and we have to diligently water them for a long time. You could say that the biotech industry in Cambridge was 400 years in the making, because that's how long the universities have been there.
So thank you so much for that explanation, and really, because life science really is a broad field of many different many different industries. So with that, I was hoping to kind of bridge to, as I mentioned before, we do have life sciences in Burlington, or life science companies. Northeastern is also doing quite a bit of life science work. And I wanted to lastly hit upon kind of what's happening in the market around us with life science interest in and around us, and who is coming to Bedford, Lexington, thinking about Billerica and some other of our neighbors. So I wanted to start with Dr. Weiner to talk a little bit about the existing businesses we have here, and then Dr. Auclair to talk about what's happening with Northeastern, and as you mentioned, kind of the manufacturing wave a little bit and how Northeastern is a part of that. And then Mr. St. Clair to talk a little bit more about the region. So, Dr. Weiner?
Thank you very much. I wanted to level set tonight. I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of what was a chemical type industry in Burlington in the early part of this last century, and where we are with that, and what life science is not, and what we have here. That's sort of the elephant in the room in some cases. Because for more than 3 decades, the Burlington Board of Health has successfully been working to clean up a community that was contaminated by, in many cases, non-regulated chemical and electronic industries. It was post-World War II. Few in the country understood the impact of chemical and biological waste. These companies who impacted this community, and all you know their names, are gone and have been gone for years, but they continue to pay for their mistakes as we clean up this town, and this town is getting clean quickly. For what we call life science today is very different industry and universe from that historical point. And this industry of what we call life science is a target of intense regulation and multiple agencies that provide oversight, so this will not become an issue again. For instance, I think you need to know that there are 6 federal regulatory authorities, including the EPA, OSHA, DEA, U.S. Health and Human Services, 4 state agencies, including the DPH, Department of Public Health, Departments of Fire, Sciences, Public Safety, Emergency Response Commissions, and many local departments, including the MWRA, and especially the Board of Health. For instance, more than 30 years ago, the town meeting, the Burlington Town Meeting, instituted an environmental engineer whose job is to daily, and continues to do this, not only coordinate what the historic cleanup is, but also inspect and ensure compliance of the hazard materials bylaws within Burlington. We have a lot of local oversight. In addition, the Board of Health has instituted an rDNA regulation, and an institution that wants to use recombinant technology must agree to our local laws here and local inspection. There's even a requirement here in Burlington to have at least 2 representatives, one town and one from the community, on their institutional review board. Last, the Board of Health has hired and has a number of professionals and have elected a number of professionals that have diverse expertise. Today's life science companies are clean and they're safe. Specifically, they are different. They use minimal amounts of chemicals, require full protocols for their waste products. They have layers of containment, everything to protect this community. And we continue under federal, state, and most local regulation. We follow that within this community. In Burlington, we have 14 life science companies. They are very diverse in what they do, ranging from a hospital that has done life science for years, as they do all kinds of medical research. And we have that to an internationally recognized medical device company, and biotech companies to a world-renowned academic institution in this community. Life science is not foreign to Burlington at this time. I don't believe that we have ever had a significant issue with any of those institutions or companies. So I wanted to level set. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right.
What's happening at Northeastern?
Yeah,
and
great.
Beyond.
So let me then just dovetail off of what Ed said into the remaining comments for my thoughts there. As somebody who still practices science in a lab just about every day, I assure you that what we do is safe. Like Ed said, there's regulations and protocols that we have to follow. We all follow them very closely. We have my family, I have young kids, right? My family to think about when I go home also, and don't want to bring anything with me, right? So we have strict protocols from things as detailed as how to clean a bench top with bleach and ethanol so that everything gets killed that would be hazardous, not that we deal with anything hazardous typically. So we're safe. I think that I'll comment on sort of what I sort of mentioned at the beginning in where the industry I think is going, and I spend a lot of my time nationally, locally, and internationally, and have a pretty good pulse on where the industry is going in Massachusetts. I think that, and these are my opinions, right? So I think that the Sigma wave is yet to come. I've been working with Sigma Millipore for a year or so as they are becoming very active in the advanced therapy space. So if you're thinking about new medicines, we're thinking about things like CAR T cells, which you would have seen in the news last November when Novartis had their first medicine approved that used your own cells to basically treat cancer in juveniles. So I think the wave is there, and that wave brings us to really impactful things that we can do in the manufacturing space, including research, which people don't typically think of when they're thinking about manufacture. And when I talk about manufacture of biologics, you can think of taking live cells and creating drugs in them and with them, or medicines. And those medicines typically would have to be produced close to a hospital that's going to administer them. So the Leahy Clinic, for example. And there needs to be lots of regulation on that. So I think that what we're going to see, and we're seeing it already in parts of the western part of Massachusetts, where large clinical manufacturing or contract manufacturing organizations are moving their manufacturing to Massachusetts because of the research that's happening here. And one area of manufacturing that's really interesting is if you make a drug like aspirin, we can do that in a closed system from the beginning to the end, where it comes into basically the pill. Biologics that are produced from biotechnology, we don't do in a closed system right now. We can't, but there is huge momentum in that space, and part of what I do is lead here at the university and in my lab here is try to lead in developments that help us close the system so that those drugs can be produced more efficiently and quickly. Also, one of the biggest things that I focus all of my time on is providing quality medicines. We don't want to produce medicines that are useless or ineffective or unsafe, right? And that's why I travel the world training international regulators on how to approve drugs so that they're safe for international markets. Sort of more broadly is I deal with bioinformatics, and you can think of bioinformatics as using computers and technology to analyze large sets of data. The life sciences produce large sets of data. I'm a life scientist, I produce large sets of data. What to do with it I'm not a computer guy, or wasn't. Can be a challenge for us. And I think that Burlington, with their history in technology, has has the opportunity for a real impact in the integration of technologies into the life sciences, including in instrumentation, analyzing new medicines, developing new technologies. I think that it's ripe for the picking. And I think, sometimes when you think of manufacturing a protein drug, right, you might think of massive buildings. I can assure you that there are large buildings that manufacture, but there's companies, including GE Sciences located in Marlborough that are producing manufacturing for biologics in shipping container size compartments that are mobile, so you can move them around and put them together like puzzle pieces and have, one per drug that you're making, for example. And we're seeing that really pick up some momentum around the world as they try to market and sell those. But other companies are doing similar things. So there's a lot of opportunity, and
What is I know Northeastern, we just permitted the building that is going up faster than any other building I've seen in a long time.
Yes.
But anyway, I just wanted to make sure that we talk a little bit about kind of what's actually happening here and what you hope to be
Yeah.
happening with some research
Great.
in the new building.
Perfect. So thank you for the new building. It's amazing to you and Northeastern. My lab is in the old Elliott Hall currently, and I will move to what we lovingly call Building 5 upon its completion. And basically triple the size of my lab space so that we can increase in research and training. I largely focus on training. I bring regulators, so regulators being US FDA type people from around the world, to Burlington to train them in advanced technologies on how to make sure that the drugs that they're approving are safe. I go to them and do it also. Clearly, I teach Northeastern students here. I do still do some of my own research in women's health. In ensuring that, we can address different issues between men and women, health-wise, and Lou Gehrig's disease or ALS. Also, like I said, we're aggressively pursuing the manufacturing space and training in the manufacturing space for biologics or protein drugs like Humira, and also really thinking about what kind of research we can do, what I call, or the industry calls, process analytics. So in the process of making a drug, instead of waiting till the drug is done, production to characterize it, to make sure everything went according to plan, we can build in things in the process to test along the way so that we can stop production if things are going awry, and start again and save money and make sure the drugs are good. So, I'm excited for the opening of the building and the expansion of my lab space and doing that. And, one thing I'm hoping that the lab does, right, is so a lot of the instrumentation that I use to do these experiments costs millions of dollars. Small startup companies oftentimes don't have access to the funds to utilize those instrumentations. So, bringing industry here to collaborate with me and do some research in that space and really leveraging the fact that we have these high-end analytical technologies in the lab to analyze drugs is what I'm hoping that we can do. I think, and my friends at Northeastern will tell you I'm an eternal optimist in this sense. My wife will tell you I'm a pessimist in real life. But the sky's the limit, and I think, part of the reason I still am working at Northeastern is because of their, one, encouragement of me, but really their innovative thinking to how all of education and research should be done, instead of what I would have went to school in vertical lanes. Like I was trained as a biotechnologist and I took all biotechnology classes and that was it. Clearly the industry, especially life sciences, doesn't exist like that. You need to know business, you need to know life sciences, and data, et cetera. So we train vertically now across all those industries and bring those pieces together. And we're bringing those pieces together on the Northeastern Innovation Campus here in Burlington and really executing a really powerful really powerful international plan. And I'll also say that if you've ever heard of the Asia Pacific Economic Corporation, which is you'll see the president go to in November every year, all presidents. We're in the Asia Pacific Economic Corporation because we border the Pacific Ocean. It took me about 4 years to figure that out. The country borders the Pacific Ocean. My lab is a internationally recognized APEC Center of Excellence in Biotherapeutics, training in the regulatory space.
Terrific. Well, there's amazing things happening in town. I want to know what's happening in the region, but I think I want to kind of group it in a little bit because I think there's a lot of things that have been said, and I think it makes sense to jump a little bit to kind of the market of life science, and because it was Dr. Auclair had mentioned kind of the clustering, and I think that really drives a little bit of the market as well. So So, Mr. St. Clair, if you can talk about kind of what's happening in the region for interest and buzz, but also really look at what's happening in the market overall. I mean, with Kendall Square, life science, Cambridge, Boston, at some point, there's not going to be any room. Maybe that's now. When are we seeing the migration into the suburbs already? Is it, or is it close on the heels to be here? As mentioned, the wave, the Sigma wave is yet to come, and I think I hope it comes. And really, what's happening in the market? What are companies looking for in the suburbs specifically? Obviously, if you want to locate in Kendall Square, you are looking for something a little bit different than the suburbs, potentially. And what kind of that clustering of companies and what type of companies are moving together, and why is it that and I think we've started to hear why companies want to be together, want to be close to the researchers, and close to the hospitals, which I think is an interesting point that I hadn't realized. But overall, if you can really tell us about the market, what life science is looking for when making a location decision, as well as what's unique about building needs for life science. What is that mix of lab, office, and what do they look at in the community? What are they looking that the community has that really gives them the indication that we're open to life science industries and space, and what should we be thinking about?
Okay, it's
I know
a
it's
long list. I
long-winded.
won't hit it all in the first sentence, but I'll do my best. So, first of all, I think just to put into perspective, Ed mentioned that it's a 29 million square foot market in Greater Boston for life science, and his stats and my source of stats are very similar. We kind of rounded to 30 because there's some new projects coming on. So you have 30 million square feet in Greater Boston. Only a third of that is in Cambridge. And the other 2/3 is around, obviously. And then if you look at more specifically, when you think of the communities that have the largest share of this, usually Lexington comes to mind, or maybe Waltham, maybe even Bedford. The corridor that runs from Burlington to Billerica, the Route 3 Middlesex Turnpike corridor, is actually the largest of the submarkets. It has 2.6 million square feet of life science. Now, not all of that is in Burlington, but Burlington, the people that are going to Hayden Avenue or Hartwell Avenue in Lexington, or to some extent going to Burlington, certainly going to Billerica or Bedford, all of them are at some point during the day or the week driving through Burlington. Burlington is the only community that really has a live, work, play set of amenities, and Burlington is not really taking full advantage of that. So you're already getting a huge traffic impact, and that's not going to change as the other communities around you are moving forward. The other communities around you have figured out that this is not a dangerous industry. It's not going to pollute the water or the air. It's not going to, create the legacy problems that some communities, including Burlington, have dealt with. And they've also understood that it's another leg to the stool of being economically diverse and being able to take a piece of a very strong, very well capitalized growth market. The capital coming into this market, money, in all aspects, venture funding, publicly traded companies, the real estate is gone up by a multiple factor. And from a real estate perspective, the best example of that is you can now build these buildings in the suburbs and there'll be an investor who will buy them from you. Before that wasn't the case. You had to hold them forever. Look at Alexandria and Hartwell Avenue, and you only saw those companies that would hold forever doing that type of work. There's no amenities over there. There's no place to go to lunch except you want to go to Margaritaville or whatever the name of the little restaurant is. And I'm not disparaging, I'm just being factual. So Burlington has all of these things, and the success of Burlington as an office retail market is probably the biggest reason why Burlington hasn't done more lab work, is because the building owners and the investors haven't needed to find this other opportunity to reposition their buildings to. They were making money in their same old business model. Burlington thrived through the early 2000s up into the Great Recession and thrived then again from 2009 and is thriving now. It's been through some ups and downs, but if your goal is to take part in what is going to be the next big thing, then there's a couple of things that you can do. The move with the zoning is a great indicative move. It isn't really, though, going to help empirically. It's not dense enough. It separates buildings into subsets, and that's, part of the building is office, part of the building is lab. That's not the way these buildings are designed. That's not the way the buildings lay out. The densities need to be closer to a 1.0 to really do good lab buildings. Much of the work that is happening right now also is related to converting existing buildings, because the cost of building new buildings in the suburbs, even though the market is going like that, you need, there are a few examples, say in Lexington, where those are kind of the Class A core suburban markets, Lexington, Waltham, maybe Bedford in a couple spots, where you can get high enough rents to justify the cost to build a new lab building. Cost to build a new lab building, $400 to $600 a square foot. Office buildings in Burlington sell for $180 to $225 a foot, fully leased. It's a completely different ballgame because of the capital that goes into these things. So the window of opportunity in the next couple years is going to be converting existing buildings that have the right clear heights, the right support with the infrastructure, so utilities and the systems in the buildings that will allow those buildings to support the biotech users. All the office buildings built in Burlington on 128, 90% of those don't support that, so you're not a threat to those folks. There are a couple that are converting, but most will not be able to make that conversion. So really what you're doing, you're having the opportunity to take dated, older buildings that don't really have as much demand in the old world economics and putting them into a new world economics where they're much more valuable. And they're at a price point that is low enough that you can actually play ball today while the rents are climbing up to the place where you get to higher replacement cost rents, meaning the rents are high enough to afford to build a new building. Cambridge is building buildings on every last square foot because the rents are high enough to support that. And there are a couple places in the burbs where that's happening, and that will continue to trend, but that won't be the majority of the market. So I think the opportunity for Burlington is, it's kind of the hole in the donut. You all have a thriving, mixed-use, very low-density-based economy as you look at it through the real estate lens. You can densify that and go to and blend up with a life science product that kind of hits a different capital structure and brings in a whole another level of business economic drivers to your economy. And actually the impact on the office market, which you don't want to forsake because that's still going to be the biggest piece of the pie, at least for the foreseeable future, is you take some of the office product that doesn't work as well as office building out of the market, and you actually make a more resilient office market, an office market that has less vacancy in it because you've converted some of that to different uses. And you've got a more resilient market, so when the office market rents go down and you've got life science, which runs on a slightly different cycle, you have a much more resilient economy. So, I think the opportunities are huge. I think you have all the building blocks. I think the steps that you're taking are good steps, but they're timid. I'm not trying to be judgmental, but they're little tiny steps. And if you cobble together a bunch of little tiny steps, it does make a ripple. But if you want to go to the next level, I think you really need to analyze more thoroughly as it relates to how the real estate community is going to look at these buildings and these new regulations and say, what's the next step? If this is the step that you need to do because it's what you can do right now, have it be a step in the process. At least that would be my suggestion, because we would love to do more work here. It's just harder to do it here. And if this opens the door to more opportunities, then I think you'll see a lot more of those opportunities here, and you might get that Millipore Sigma effect that you've been looking for.
Can you talk a little bit, you mentioned kind of the need for additional density for the lab type space, but we've been talking quite a bit about what the actual impact of lab is versus the traditional office. I mean, with the traditional office, you have a certain amount of bodies per square foot, you have a parking, certain parking demands and effects of traffic and trips on the neighboring roadways. But what we're finding in conversations is that, with the lab space, we do see it, people are telling us that there is quite less density per square foot within the buildings that wouldn't require the parking ratios and other, and wouldn't generate the impacts. But could you talk a little bit about that in terms of what you're finding in the industry as well, and what the differences are between the impacts of kind of traditional office and kind of a life science mix building?
So office buildings traditionally have had a ratio of parking of 3 to 4 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. So if you look at a site and you say, okay, that's a particular site might have a 0.15 or maybe even a 0.25 FAR density. So you can build a building that's a tiny little dot in the middle of this huge field of parking with some green space around it. I mean, that's basically what, if you get on Google, that's what all these office buildings in the suburbs look like, right? And it's a result of the formula that's in the code. But it's also a result of the user need. So the regulations are that, and the market has traditionally been that. For office buildings, the market is changing though. The office spaces are becoming much more dense. The population of people per square feet in office buildings is going down. It used to be that you'd have one person for every 3, 4, maybe even 500 or 600 square feet. Companies are seeing that as a place to save money and have shared officing, and some people work from home and they really densify it, and so they are pushing those ratios so it's maybe one person every 200-300 square feet, and in urban settings even like 125. I mean, it's gone to the extreme. What's now pushing back a little bit, but the Pandora's box is the genie's been let out of the bottle. We're not going to go back to these much less dense ratios. Well, when you do that and you have these flexible use patterns in these office buildings now, your parking ratios go from 3 to 4 per 1,000 up to 5, 6 per 1,000, which just exacerbates this low density sprawl problem. So that's the reality with office now, and that's the trend. Biotech, on the other hand, it goes the other way. Biotech has maybe one worker per 300 square feet in the office type of space, and maybe one worker per 1,000 feet, per 2,000 feet in lab or manufacturing or research space. It really depends because it go up and down the gamut. So for every 1,000 square feet of a lab building, which is part office, part lab support, part lab or manufacturing, those things all blend together, and there's no real way to do a clear delineation. But in that mix, and typically it's a 60-40 mix, lab to office, lab 60, office 40. In that mix, you might have a parking ratio that you only need 1 space per 1,000, or maybe 2. And so you're able to build a bigger building with less parking on the same size site. That building is worth a lot more. It creates a lot more economic value. It has a higher tax base. That building's worth $400, $500, $600, $800 a foot. There's been a number of sales in Waltham recently that are going $700, $800 a foot. I mean, that's crazy numbers, but it's true. It's what's happening. And the reason is because these buildings are super expensive to build. You're getting creditworthy tenants signing long-term leases, and they're paying $40 triple net. And you just do the math, and that's what those buildings are selling for. And you're getting these institutional buyers really for the first time coming in and buying them as investments, which they never did before. So you're going to really see that financial phenomenon ramp up, and the communities that are ready to take advantage of that are really going to see a real opportunity. So again, I think the things that you can do as a community is try to dispel these older notions that it's a dangerous industry. It isn't, and all the other towns around you have figured that out. That density is your friend, and biotech is not going to replace office. It's not even going to match up square footage to square footage, but it could be a percentage, 10, 15, 20% of your overall market, and that's a really valuable way to diversify your economy. And you have all the elements already in place to make this the most attractive biotech market in the Boston suburbs. So I really, and I honestly do feel like these things are all aligned, and the timing is good for you to take advantage of what may be a real ramp in the industry.
So you mentioned kind of the timid step, and one of the things that we are looking at is increasing the dimensional floor area ratio from a 0.15, 0.25, which has been problematic in redevelopment over time. Much of Burlington in the office markets and commercial areas are about a 0.42. So when you say it with the regulations at 0.15, 0.25, there's actually only one or two buildings that actually were built on that ratio since it was in place in 1990. So, I mean, I think overall we recognize that has been a low ratio. What we had looked at here was to increase that for the lab component only to the 0.50, but combined can only be 0.50, and the other non-lab would need to remain under the existing provisions. But from what you're seeming to say, that the impacts are really only 25%, if that, of the traditional office buildings that we're seeing. We have a lot of as you mentioned, we have a lot of traditional office buildings. We built a lot of office in the 80s and 90s that were luckily still occupied. But what we don't have is a lot of that type of lab space where a company wants to come to Burlington. It's not easy without kind of massive retrofitting
Right.
or new construction to be here. So would you say, based on your comments, that if we were to potentially allow for either a greater density of the combined office lab type spaces or just greater densities in terms of the FAR number, even if it was, right now we're going from 0.25 to 0.5, which is a smaller step, but if the impacts are truly 25% of what the office impacts are, should we be looking at that higher number? And if it was a higher number, how much difference would that make in terms of the interest in the community when people are making decisions on locations? Is that, in terms of in what people are looking for, what are those number 1, 2, 3 things that are important for locating? And is that type of density one of them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if you're the end user, the biotech or the life science company, you care about clustering and all of those things and the quality of life and the amenities. But what you care about most is speed to market. The industry is much more speed driven because they're changing people's lives, and there's a lot of money invested behind changing people's lives. I mean, ultimately, I've talked a lot about money and capital, but ultimately this is an industry focused on, with very strong altruistic drives, but also a lot of ego and capital to go change the world and save people's lives and really make an improvement in their quality of life. And that has a certain inherent impatience and drive to success. And we're also looking at all these new therapies that instead of doing one therapy that might be this blockbuster discovery that lasts for 20 years and you make a bazillion of them, and you can go make them in Ireland because they give you tax credits or whatever, it's much smaller, customized batch type of delivery systems and designed around much smaller solutions. You probably can add the right medical and biotechnical terms on this, but the nature of what they're solving for, the tools that they have with CRISPR and all the other genome technologies allows them to do a much more targeted, customized approach to try to solve a much smaller segment. So they have to do a lot of those things, but they have to move very quickly to do it. So what does that mean for the real estate? It means they need to make a decision quickly. They need to know that it's predictable. They need to know that that they're going to be able to get their building permit, that they're not going to be held up by some sort of review process. And you probably have the processes in place that facilitate that, but communicating and marketing yourself that you're good at that. Maybe you say, I was talking to a colleague about this, and we were just throwing some ideas around, and he said, they shouldn't have to, landlords and tenants in empty biotech buildings shouldn't have to pay taxes until it's occupied. I was like, well, good luck on that. But, maybe there should be tax breaks, or, but the building we just bought in Billerica, we got the economic development officer came to us and said, what can we do for you guys? And so when we got a tenant, it's the first person we connected them to, and they're talking in a very meaningful way, and all the buildings around us have ongoing conversations. So, that's pretty meaningful. And so we also were able to get our building permits very quickly. They were clapping us to get to the door, and let's get from, this approval station to that approval station, and there was a sense of desire and predictability, and, their process may not be that much different than yours, but it's a matter of marketing and branding and communication. Somebody said, should Burlington change their name to BioLington? I was like, it doesn't roll off the tongue. But, the idea that you're really receptive to this will be heard in the community. But more so for the biotech and life science industry, the availability of the building with the right bells and whistles quickly is paramount. That's the single most important thing. So if you don't have the buildings already, what you want to do is encourage the development investment side of the equation to come in and say, wait a minute, Burlington is the place that's going to help us. They've densified their, they basically said, we'll give extra density bonuses for life science. That's a huge bonus. And we'll find other ways to help make the process go more smoothly and more predictably. And then suddenly you've got more pipeline that would be available when that user comes along.
Yeah, I think what we try to do with everything in the bylaw is looking at projects and, really minimizing any negative impact from any type of use that's going to come in. But I think it's important, and what our attempt is with the amendment is to really reflect and understand what life science is, and really look at those impacts that do seem to be a lot less than the traditional office for which we have the regulations in place. So I think those are, thank you for helping us understand that a little bit more.
Can I add one personal note to the biotech industry? That this is a personal note, and I see this evolving as the industry matures. Cambridge is becoming saturated, and as the industry matures, people like me who started in the industry a long time ago, not that long though, a long time ago, right? I have no interest in going to Cambridge. The thought of driving into Cambridge to work turns my stomach. Luckily, I don't have to do it, but most of my friends in my age bracket, we don't want to do that either, right? And the people in the more mature companies, and as companies mature, are realizing that the mature workforce doesn't want to be in Cambridge. The young guys and the gals want to be there and drive the research. That's great, they can still do that, but we want to move out and away from the city and raise our families in communities like this. And the more opportunities that we can have to do that, I think, is all the better.
Yep. I can second that. 15 years ago, we noticed this problem in Cambridge, and now it's ever more acute. It's easy to stock a lab with scientists, but finding managers who are a little older and have kids and have moved to the suburbs is increasingly difficult. And you need several layers to well manage a company, and so there's certainly a place for a mixed lab office space in the suburbs for companies that are at a different stage. And I don't think that we need to transplant directly what's in Cambridge and put it here. I think the market will largely decide. We just have to provide the opportunities for companies to locate in the suburbs. And that's a much better option for some companies. And we see it happening up and down Crosby Ave in Bedford. You see it up and down Hartwell and a couple other places, Hayden in Lexington. These are right next door, and they're having a lot of this this activity move in and we see less of it.
Yeah, thank you very much. The last topic, which I wanted to talk about, was kind of the safety of the industry, but I think we've touched upon that quite a bit with a lot of the comments so far. Was there anything else that we wanted to kind of just really hit home with, that it isn't the old industries of, Burlington's past by any means, and that just really wanted to hit home, as you guys have all mentioned, really the amount of regulation, including local regulation by the Board of Health, that this industry has, but it just, even before that overall it's a fairly clean industry, or is a clean industry, as Dr. Weiner had mentioned.
This isn't your grandfather's chemical company. This is highly regulated. The Board of Health has expedited almost every decision that we've had to make. We have the people to do the research, people to come in, do a presentation, and they're out. I can't remember a time when we had to continue a special permit. We do the work, we get it done, it comes to planning board, to us, we approve it, goes back, and it's done. I think that one of the things that we need to think about is showing that, is to highlighting that we have not been, whether it's the Board of Health, whether it be the planning board, the fire department, whomever, we have not been an obstacle in getting things done. We get it done right, we get it done quickly, we assure that things are safe, just as a tacit look at it, but we also can depend upon the fact that there's a lot of other regulation well above us. So I think Burlington does a good job in getting these things passed, getting these through the maze very quickly, and that's been an objective for the planning board and the Board of Health for many years, and I think we do it very well. I think that it's not well advertised that we do that. It's not well advertised that we move things quickly, that we respect the fact that it's a clean industry, and we understand that. We understand biotech.
I would just say on the bylaw that's happening, the bylaw is an embodiment of kind of not just rules and regulations. I mean, it is, but it also has to get backed by the community, and those things represent change, and change comes often in steps. I think this is a spectacular step in the right direction. What I would just urge people to do is, if you really want this to spur the development that is right size for the density, there will need to be another step for it to really be more than a symbol, not something that's tangible. The way it's written, as I understand it, having read it and talked to the folks here who also know it, is that it's a blend between a 0.25, on the best case, a 0.25 on the office and a 0.5 in the lab, which means you might end up at a 3.5, maybe a 3.65, 3.7. I'm sorry, 0.3. That's at or below what all the buildings you already have built already are. So you're really enabling something that is at or a little bit less in density than what you already have. And the lab and biotech community really should look at, in the suburban setting, a 0.8 to a 1, maybe 1.2 FAR. That's the right metric for FAR to get the right ratio of parking to building height, and you're doing that without really impacting the traffic, because you've got more building and less cars, and it all, I think, gets you to the same place from a traffic point of view, because traffic is very important. But Burlington already gets more than its share of traffic of all the people driving around, going to these other towns to go to their respective jobs. I think you should try to catch more of that and keep it at home.
Yeah, and that's a good point in looking at towns around us, that in terms of floor area ratio, there's many of our neighbors either have definitely above a 0.5 overall, not just for life science, or some of the towns have over 1 or none at all. So I think that is something that we wanted to explore through these proposed changes, as well as this discussion, and really understand impacts from those of you that are involved in the industry and constructing and getting tenants to, life science tenants. So the last thing I wanted to do is just really go through across the panel, starting with Dr. Parsons, of just kind of what else should we be thinking about? What else should we know about life science? I mean, it sounds like, and I would agree that we definitely have a lack of lab-type space in Burlington. I think it's growing a little bit, but Burlington has had a strong commercial market, but we have a strong office market. We don't necessarily have a strong mix and diversity of space. We look for, and have always strived for, a diversity of industry within Burlington. You never want your eggs in one basket. We've been lucky not to have that, but we also need a diversity of space to house those different types of industries as the business needs grow and change. So just last thoughts, and kind of what else should we know? What's next in terms of life science? And thank you all.
I have to agree that this is a bit of a reorientation of the zoning bylaws to be more receptive to biotech in particular. I'm on the committee that looked at this proposed bylaw amendment, and so I've picked through, point by point, what changes, and it doesn't change things that much. It just is trying to garner the attention of people who might want to put in a lab. And I think it's going to be meaningful if it reflects a commitment to be very proactive and to look at what's out there. And I think that giving more opportunity for laboratory spaces is very helpful, but it's not necessarily everything. It is one thing that enables a broader industry, and as I mentioned, there are a lot of different technology players and areas of technology and industry that go into the life sciences, and I think you can diversify the economy here and get a lot done without a ton of lab space coming in, but you have to allow for that possibility, and you have to really reach out. You have to think about plan development and think about finding the buildings that could be converted, and looking at a lot of related industries that might have some lab space. So I think this is the first step, but you have to keep your eye on the ball if you want to make things happen.
Thank you.
I've spoken my piece. Bad.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Auclair?
Yeah, I mean, I won't comment on bylaws. That's not my place. I'm not versed in those things, but I can tell you that we're only at the beginning of this quote-unquote biotech boom. And I can also tell you that Massachusetts, okay, I'm biased, but Massachusetts has won the biotech battle and is the international hub of all biotechnology. And that's not going to change. So, it's up to all of us to decide what that looks like for all of our communities.
And we have more than a dozen life science companies in Burlington right now. And all are doing well. We have a couple of world-renowned, well-recognized names of major life science companies here in Burlington. And I think we need to go to them, and I think we need to use them as examples to show that can work so well, that shows that they can be improved, they can be approved very quickly, that shows that Burlington has it all. So it's not like we're starting at ground zero. We've got some major presence here already. We just need to expand that, because it is clean, and it's safe, and there is oversight.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. This has been amazing and so informative. So now, I know we ran a little bit over, but I'm sure hopefully everyone will be able to stay a little bit longer. But now I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. And I actually, if there's a microphone up here, if we can just push that kind of behind, you can just bring it even further. Or actually, you know where you need to put it to be on BCAT. So put it. Yes, anyway, you know where the microphone needs to be on camera. But anyway, if you want to come up to the microphone, or if it's easier just to grab the microphone. Sure, of course. Mr. Buckley?
Thank you. Is it on? Is it on? Yep. Okay, there you go. Pick it up, okay. You gonna tell me where to put it? First of all, I want to applaud Kristin for having this forum. I think it's been fascinating. The information that was brought out here reinforces everything we've had discussions over the past few years. Dr. Clair, I couldn't agree with you more. I did the GE deal out in Marlboro, and Dan, we've dealt in the past, and the word predictability is what I use all the time, that these communities have to have predictability because companies that are converting space, which everyone seems to focus on what Burlington has, need the predictability because the cost of conversion is astronomical, and they want to know that if we convert, we'll stay, it will grow. So you have to be able to generate that message to the marketplace so that they understand that if you come here and utilize some of the assets that are in this community on the conversion of existing space to make it more productive, that you will be able to grow and prosper in the community. And to that point, I think Burlington has all of the ingredients. You have absolute world-class medical facilities. You have universities between Northeastern and University of Lowell, and it's not all PhD scientists, but you have Middlesex Community College that could provide the technicians, the staff. You have the labor pool. You have to coalesce all of these talents together to make it work. And you know what you lack? The ability to bring all those disparate or existing assets together. And maybe you need an economic development director that would be able to look at this and say, if Dan has a client that is looking at a building here, or you're contemplating making an investment, how does that person shepherd you through and tell you what you have? Someone just said you do a poor job of marketing what you already have. You have it, you just don't market it. Right. And that is the key. So again, I applaud you for it. I think that it was fascinating to listen to everyone's presentation. The talent that exists in town is impressive to see. And hopefully going forward, things will be a lively discussion.
Hopefully this is just the beginning. Yes, feel free to come up. Yes.
Hi, I'm Chris Warren. I'm Precinct 4 Town Meeting member. And I wanted to ask Mr. St. Clair, I don't know that I heard you correctly. Did you say that 90% of office buildings are not convertible? Or not convertible that exist in Burlington or exist in general, or? And then I have a second question.
Yeah, I mean, 90% may not be exactly precise, but it's the vast majority of suburban office buildings. So generally, and in Burlington, are not a good conversion for lab and GMP manufacturing and other biotech or life science uses. The ceiling heights are too low. The column grids are not spaced wide enough. The infrastructure in the building, like a simple thing, office building uses 10% fresh air, 90% recycled air. Lab buildings usually take 100% fresh air, cool it, heat it, use it, dump it. It's not the most efficient, and there are some more efficient models out there for trying to recapture some of the wasted heat and cool. But those types of systems are the very first place the engineers look at a building, and they're like, okay, what sort of mechanical systems do you have on the roof of the building? And so office buildings just don't offer that.
My second question is, with this industry, do you find that everyone is, that the companies are locating to Billerica or Lexington or Bedford or Waltham, is everybody driving, or do you also have people commuting in different ways?
Well, there aren't a whole lot of non-driving commuting options. I mean, maybe there's a shuttle bus. Some of the big corporate users have some shuttle services, especially if they have multiple locations. Some of them have them because they have parking constraint issues. But, you know, for the most part, I think this is a drive and park solution, you know. But I think you're seeing with kind of on-demand, you know, Uber, Lyft, whatever services, that is really beginning to change the options that people have. And that probably will have more of an impact than, you know, I don't expect there to be subway services in Burlington anytime soon, or, you know, new bus services, but there will be less and less costly kind of on-demand driver services through these third parties.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Betsy Hughes, Precinct 7. I had two questions. One is you referenced the 12 biotech companies that are currently here, and I'm assuming some of those 12 have lab space, a combination of both of lab and office space. And so my question is, how do they deal with the limitations on the FAR? Because obviously they must be subject to the same limitations.
I don't think that I can answer that.
I don't have a list in front of me of all 12.
14.
But there are 14. I will say Millipore, who just did construct their building, they are at a 0.25 FAR, but they used all of the Route 3 layout is also part of that FAR, so they have a lot. I mean, obviously 0.25 is a lot of land in a building. In Burlington, I think what we're hearing here, and just in general, there are very little, if not any, open green space locations like that which existed on the summit. So I think they were a company that were able to build based on just the large area of open land. We don't have that much, if any, left. So as we're hearing here with the conversions of existing buildings or potential reconstruction, when you're looking at a building that either might now be either above that 0.25 in existing building, in order to rebuild a building or to demolish a building, build a new building, unless you're at a higher FAR, it's just not feasible because we don't have the options available to be able to build a building with the limitations that are in place now. So that's the most recent example. For some of the other other companies here, most of them have occupied existing buildings, and are most of them fairly small?
Most of them, to actual size, I'll yield to my environmental engineer or director of public health, who inspect them all the time.
But went into existing buildings.
Went into existing buildings? Yes.
Yeah, and some of our older industrial buildings that we have in town do afford some of those larger ceiling heights on the first floor without the columns and podium limitations. But again, I mean, there's a handful that are existing that we can kind of make it work in a handful of spaces. So what I think we're hearing from the panel here is, if we're really serious about this, we just need to be looking at the whole picture of the redevelopment picture in Burlington. Because, I mean, that's our story for the most part. We don't have a lot of greenfield. It's mostly we're looking at redevelopment of kind of the 1950s, 60s, 70s era buildings into the next thing. I mean, our buildings from the 80s and 90s 80s, 90s, 2000 office buildings are doing pretty well. But those were not necessarily built for this newer type of industry. So long answer, I guess.
That's okay, it was really helpful. I just, I think it's probably an important point to make about the lack of green space and the ability of companies coming in here to actually do the things that the current companies who are here are doing to meet that FAR. It just, it might be helpful for other folks. And then the other, and this was something I'm on the zoning bylaws committee with Ed, and one of the things that I think that we found very illuminating was a description of what a lab looks like today. Because, as you mentioned, it's not your grandfather's lab. And the way people work in those labs is very different today. And maybe if somebody could just talk about that for my fellow town meeting members, it might be really helpful to understand exactly, what the vision is. If there was a picture, that would be awesome, but if maybe you can paint one verbally for us.
What'd you take?
Yeah, I think, Jeff, you probably have the best perspective, but what I mentioned in the committee meeting is that there are companies that order tons of material, and but I've worked with a lot of small biotechs that pay millions of dollars for a gram of materials. Sometimes manufacturing facilities are very tiny, very high-tech, very high value. And so there's a pretty broad spectrum of the scale of what a lab might look like, and the variety of technologies that could be in there is would defy description in an evening. I'll let you make your
Yeah,
attempt.
I mean, I think the modern lab space is evolved, right? Even in the last couple of decades that I've been in the field, I can tell you that a couple of things have happened largely. There's been a lot more automation built into what we do, right? So I don't need to be in front of whatever I'm doing constantly. I can do multiple experiments at once, for example. The technologies have largely outpaced what I expected them to in terms of their capabilities. My lab has 4 high-end instruments that, might be the size of your washing machine, and cost a couple $1 million. And I operate those in the lab. I can also operate them remotely from my house, or from my cell phone. I'm not that advanced, though, so from my house.
Must have great apps.
Yeah, they're good apps, yeah. And the other thing that's happening now that's really fascinating to me is there's a huge push in the industry, both from the perspective of a lab space and from the perspective of us wanting to take our technologies to the clinic and to the hospital for miniaturization of everything that we do. So taking those, even the machines I have now that are washing machine type size things, that were acquired 4 years ago, the newer models have reduced in size by more than half, right? And the lab space is super clean, it's modern. I watched NCIS this morning with my daughter. You can almost think of it sort of like that. It's not so cluttered as that. Depends on the person. My lab's not that cluttered. But it goes to the people that need to be there too, right? We don't need as many people. It tends to be automated, and that's only to get more automated. And really, it also fits the mold of biotech being interdisciplinary. All the labs now have to have interdisciplinary aspects, from chemistry to biology to physics, which is not my area, so I won't even talk about it.
I think generally the spaces, if you look at the buildings are pretty generic containers for what might be a space that has a clean room over here, a shipping and receiving space over here, a lab space that has hookups for the gases and storage of chemicals and the treatment of the RODI water and the acid neutralization systems and all that kind of stuff. And so, and then next week, or maybe, and it's probably an exaggerate, next year, maybe a different drug comes in and they have to change it and reconfigure it. Right. And so the stuff that stays consistent is really what your, as a building owner and developer and as a town from a permitting perspective, is you're looking at that box and how many parking spaces and what's on the roof and what sort of power is delivered and what sort of air is getting pushed through the building. And the user might come and reconfigure that 10 different ways. And it may look more office-y or it may look more kind of flex industrial, but the stuff that happens inside can really range very dramatically due to the change of science, even within the same company. So I think building those robust boxes or converting the buildings that could be converted into those robust boxes with all the bells and whistles is really what the investors and the tenants are looking for. Because the tenants, they know what they need. The landlords don't even get into that often, other than maybe approving their plan, but, and funding a piece of it, but it can vary widely.
I just want to follow up on that a little bit because it's come up. In terms of if you build lab spaces, how likely is it that they're going to stay lab spaces? Or are they going to, the concern of converting to something else that might be more of an impact? But what I'm hearing in talking to you guys before this panel as well as on this panel is that when you're building a space, you're building it with certain baseline things like the air conversion and a bunch of other things that you more technically can talk about. But really leaving it open to have that open floor plan to bring in the washing machine to do the washing machine something or the other machine. But it's not as if you're building in to the lab space a specific industry that's only for that industry. And I think that's important for us in terms of if we're going to build something and invest something, and as well as people are going to build it, that it is a space that can be used regardless if that particular company is here for the long run or moves off or gets bought out from something else, that the space itself is very adaptable to another company moving in. And I think that's really important when we talk about this lab space, to make sure that it stays a lab space and stays at kind of the impact we're talking about if we do allow for an additional density. And would you agree that that's
Yeah,
kind of what we're
and
seeing?
I think that's where one of the implementation challenges comes with the bylaw separating within the same building an office and a lab space, because 3 weeks into it, you might realize, well, wait a minute, they're not using what they said was office as office anymore. You know, are they somehow now out of compliance? You know,
That's a good point.
does the flag get thrown in the field and say, no, you need another 3 parking spots, and you don't have that, right? I mean, that's what I worry about when I look at the way this is crafted. Again, a very exciting step in the right direction, but I think that, you know, the 2.0 version probably wants to think about that a little differently.
I mean, it's interesting to think about, right? Because in my own life experience working at a startup company, we had designated lab space, and it stayed lab space, but we outgrew it, right? And things spilled into the lab space that became, I mean, the office space that then became lab space.
Yeah, that washing machine sitting in the hallway and people are walking by it, and
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a person, a washing machine, and the cube.
Yeah, I've had the same experience where the copying machine got thrown out and a protein synthesizer
Right.
was wheeled in, and
it doesn't make great copies.
It doesn't. Well, it makes very solid copies of proteins.
Right,
That's
okay.
These labs are pretty modular. In fact, that machine that could be a lunchbox size or washing machine size is doing the work that a couple decades ago might have been, 100 people with micropipettes.
Yeah.
Everything is miniaturized, everything's automated, everything's modular, and you really can reconfigure a lab and do very different things with the same space.
But you guys are seeing a trend more of, if you have an office lab mix, the lab is the one that really starts to take over, not the office.
It can be.
Yeah, I mean, I think the lines get blurred, and, you know, at what point are you not in the lab? I mean, there's certain regulations. If you're like in a Bio 3 facility, you've got to go through the vestibule and put your robe on and all that
Right.
kind of stuff. But most of the stuff, the common stuff isn't at that level. It's BL1 and BL2. You know, you can walk freely from one space to the next, and, you know, people are trying to break down those barriers between where the scientist sits, where the, you know, person in the lab might be working, and the actions happening in the mixing space, the hallway space in between, often, so.
I mean, the person that goes from the lab to the office always has their heart in the lab and will try to get
Right.
back there.
And you're seeing more and more, the labs used to be, 20 years ago, they didn't have any natural light, and now it's the opposite. The high-value space is the lab, and they want the natural light to come in, and that's where the researchers want to be. And they'll give up their office to have a little cubicle around the corner. And so you're seeing a more flexible layout of the space. And what was all built-in furniture with these epoxy tops and all the hard-wired stuff is becoming flexible rolling stuff that, you know, one day is over here, the next day is over there, next day it's all cleared out because they've got a different piece of equipment in the room. And so it's a totally different animal than 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave Miller, Town Meeting Member from Precinct 4, and we're going to be voting on this in about a week and a half. And when I heard the discussion about the floor area ratio, I think was from Dan saying, well, maybe this was a little timid and we really need to go higher. Do we think that by voting on this amendment that it's going to accomplish the goals that we think it is, that will attract more life sciences to Burlington?
I think we heard that this was a step in the right direction. Do we move forward here, and then we continue to evaluate, and maybe we move forward again and, 2.0 in May or September, if it really isn't getting to what we hope to really catch the wave that's coming, that we hope to catch in Burlington. So,
Let me ask you,
Sure.
would the community, if this passes, be open-minded to if somebody came along and said, I have this site, or I have this building, I want to take it down or convert it or add to it, and I have a user, or I have a belief that the users will be here, and I want to invest $20 million in this site. But for it to work, and I'll show you all the math, and the traffic engineers and all that will prove this all out to you, open book, it's got to be a 1-0 ratio. I mean, is there an open-mindedness, I guess, and I know you can't answer this, but is this a step forward where the community says, this is the general rule, but we realize maybe on a case-by-case basis, we need to, be more open because although this is a step in the right direction and we're not willing to go whole hog, maybe we leave the door open on for some relief on that case-by-case. That would be what I would hope would be part of the outcome of this. Because I think if you did that, people, boy, I tell you, that would really send a sign.
yeah, I think based on just the technical aspects of advertising zoning bylaw changes and not really being able to, you add some flexibility in the advertising, but, we all usually keep to the idea of, if we set a certain number, we don't go higher than the number. You can tighten it up, but really opening it up would need a new hearing process. But I think what is important is what we've learned from this panel, understanding the market a little bit more. And if there is real-life examples, that only helps to illustrate the importance to maybe not take as timid of a step and continue to amend further the opportunities for whether it's case by case or just in general, that life science or the mix of a life science type building potentially does have a higher ratio because the impacts have demonstrated that they're even or lower than that of what traditional office that we've seen. So to the point of that you made of what we're voting on, and is that I think this is the beginning of potentially a multi-step process to really achieve the goals, if it is something, which I hope it is, that we want to embrace the life science industry as it's, if Massachusetts is it, we want to make sure we catch the wave. So thank you.
I think the specific question was, is it going to achieve what we think it's going to achieve? I don't know what we think it's going to achieve, and there are 126 town meeting members and might have all different ideas. I think what...
Well, I want to know, what's the intent of the people who wrote the bylaw?
Right.
What do they want it to achieve?
Kristin can speak to that. I can give you my impression of what I think it'll achieve. Do you want to start there while I'm talking? So the Massachusetts Biotech Council, or MassBio for short, has established just last year these bio-ready criteria for communities, and they've published a map on their website, and Burlington is bio-ready bronze. And we could step up to bio-ready gold, or silver or gold if we make a few changes to zoning regulation, and one big one is to have by right ability to put a biotech laboratory or manufacturing facility. So this establishes that in one zone, and it allows by special permit in a couple of other places. It gives a bit of an incentive and a higher maximum floor area ratio. Is that meaningful? I don't know. You have to go, we'd have to walk around those zones and see what buildings are there and what you could do with them, and I don't have that knowledge. I think that what it might do is it'll lead to more people making a phone call and exploring what they could do. And at that point, actually getting something done requires more work. And there may be more zoning changes that would be necessary. There may be more resources that the planning department and the building department needs to get these things done. And we need to make a decision on whether we're committed to keep moving forward.
Well, and I would also add to that, if you're looking to make an investment here and you say, we have a site, we've talked to the town leaders and they seem to really want something. And let's say we have two different communities we're looking at a similar opportunity. We have a user, we can go to Lexington or we can go to Burlington. If the will is there by both the communities, but one site requires a special permit but not a trip to town meeting, and there's a more predictable path for that, still a pretty tortured process and not ideal from a predictability perspective. But the other one says, yeah, we really like it, we got to go to town meeting. All bets are off. It's hands down to your advantage if you're an investor and you usually have the fiduciary of other investors behind you to do right by yourself and by them to go to the one that has the lowest risk profile in the shortest period of time. So if there could be if this is a path to a place where either you have that 2.0 version that is, not just one district and not still really constrained by FAR, if a more broad and denser kind of blanket solution is not available, if there's a way to get it to a place where it's more broad with let's go talk to the town and go through public process like planning boards and town administrative process with public review, but not have to go to town meeting, because the hurdle for town meeting is so high and becomes so political that most investors will just say, no, I'm not going to do that.
So as a member of town meeting, I think it's instructive to hear the perspective of town meeting being characterized as a risk. I think we see ourselves as, protectors. But, from the other side, I think you can see where it makes a lot of sense to consider carefully what we want in the future and plan for allowing that in an easy and efficient way rather than reacting later. Because if you're going to react later to what someone wants to develop, you're already too late. They put the building in Lexington.
Right, and I think that's primarily, the story, at least modern history of Burlington, is trying to figure out what's next, put in place regulations that make sense. Since 1977, we've done 104, roughly 104 zoning amendments. We've done 50 since 2004. And it's just incrementally listening to what's happening, understanding the market, understanding trends, not to do things that, to react quickly to just kind of the happening buzz that's going on, but really systematic shifts that happen within, economic development. And this is definitely one of them. And I think we've identified that we're not quite there. And this is a step to move forward, and I think we are continuing to learn and not knowing exactly what we're at the tip of the iceberg for what this industry is going to be. We're not going to know everything. We're not going to put in place in one zoning amendment everything we need to have in place to really embrace what it is that we've found that is right to foster and bring here in Burlington. So I think, and I hope that this is, as I said, the beginning of this discussion about life science, but also the beginning of really looking at the regulatory picture and other picture to make sure that we're doing the right things to bring what we want to Burlington. So that's the general intent.
I guess that's what I'm hearing is this is the first step, and if we really want to pursue this, we're going to have to go further on with other steps down the line.
Thank you. Stephanie? Oh, no, actually, Tom Connolly has been there for a while.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Cronin. I work with a regional economic development group called the Middlesex 3 Coalition, so we include 9 communities and the high-tech companies along Route 3. So I have one comment and one question. The comment is back to a question you had earlier about transportation. So we started a Transportation Management Association a few years ago, and we've been putting buses on the road that go from Boston and Cambridge up to Billerica, Bedford, and Burlington. And we continue to add these buses because the demand just continues to grow in order to get the workers from Boston up this way and also to address the transportation. So the point is that there are other transportation resources besides just getting in your car. And we continue to grow those, and we'd love to work with you with other companies that are interested in joining the shuttle program. So there's resources out there. And the one question is, I've heard from our local community college regarding life science companies that for every PhD, you need about 10 support staff. So I want to get your feedback on that. Does that sound right to you? What type of jobs do you see that are out there? Thank you.
I guess I would say that part of my roles at the university is looking at this space of the market, right? Because we're trying to develop demand. I think that that's what I generally see. You know, the PhD scientists aren't where the market's at right now. That's why I'm investing all of my time, personal time, training master's level people. But, you know, we just got a grant from the National Science Foundation with Middlesex Community College, right, for associates to master's training, a 5-year grant, $4.5 million, right, to invest in that space, because we need people straight out of high school who can go to the manufacturing floor and help us there, and then give them paths forward as their career progresses. So, you know, the PhD people like me were not so much in demand, which is fine. I'm happy where I'm at, which I am. But so and then once you get to that place, right, and that's why I said our heart's always in the lab, because, you know, the further you go in your career with a higher degree, you just end up being more administrative, right, and you're doing less things, and you need those 10 people to support your projects and your research and your other activities. So, I mean,
Would you agree that that ratio is about?
that's about right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tom, thank you for your patience.
My pleasure. Tom Conley, Precinct 4, Town Meeting Member. Congratulations, Kristin. I think you put this together. I think it was a wonderful discussion, very enlightening, particularly, you know, as Ed was saying, how, you know, being a town meeting member, we don't see it from the other side, and what a pain in the neck we can be. And one of the things that I just had a quick question about, I don't know if this is for Ed or Jared, but we were talking about all of the regulations, the monitoring. Is that more from the state or the federal? How does that, which arm of the government is regulating?
That depends, I think, is the answer. I mean, there are clear federal guidelines in many of the types of life sciences. And the word life sciences, as we have heard, is a very diverse term. People are doing mRNA and using specific bacteria. It's very different from a company that is making catheters that we have in town. So it depends. In terms of, there are federal there's OSHA, that would go on. And then there is the state, and the state does have environmental protection, considering mostly around chemicals and disposal. And then we have local. And I think that they all work together. What's beautiful about Burlington is that we do have some local oversight. We do have an environmental engineer who goes into these companies once or twice a year and look and see what they're doing. And almost in every case, things are just perfect. but once in a while, we pick something up. And that Burlington and these companies have become partners in this. It's not adversarial, we are partners, and I think I can speak for myself and in my 30 years on the Board of Health. We've worked together to make companies successful and Burlington successful, and we never have a problem in that. I just sent Kristin a message. Maybe we can even work closer to expedite some of these approvals by even working closer. But the bottom line here is that in all areas, there is oversight. I get questioned about how safe is this to the people walking by? You know, we have over towards some of our supermarket areas, not far, there is biotech. Can we walk by there? What is this company here? And I can tell you that people within the company, they are in very safe situations, and people outside the company who are walking by in the community, it's very safe. And I think it's as much as working together than anything else. And just
I'm wondering if is it similar? I didn't mean to just step on you. I was similar to when we were talking about our water supply and how there's the EPA sets the guidelines and the state monitors it and the water department sends, is it that kind of a relationship?
I think I would like to answer this, but I do have the expert who does this every day, and I think I'm going to call on her because, but I can tell you that the federal government does set guidelines. They do set certain things more than anybody else. And I think the town has certain other guidelines, and within the two, it's cooperation. But I think the key here is that we work together, and I think that's why the 14 companies who are working together. And we've had Leahy Clinic here for decades, and Leahy Clinic has an RDNA approval permit. People don't realize there is significant international research going on at Leahy Clinic. It has been for decades, and we've worked very closely with them, and they have been very successful, as probably the penultimate example.
So
Can I also add from inside the biotech company or inside the university, right? We have environmental health and safety departments that monitor us, right? Like, I have visits from my environmental health and safety department to make sure that I'm following all the state and local guidelines, along with our collaboration with the town, right? And all biotech does that. I mean, at the heart of it, where, like you said, right, this industry is trying to drive change and help patients, and in that same effect, we are very cognizant of our impact on communities and the environment, and we don't want to do anything there either.
we live here.
That's right.
And just one thing, I just want to make sure that we get that, and you brought up a terrific question, is that life science industry is not a threat to our water supply. Okay? I get that question all the time. No, it's not a threat to our water supply as we see it.
So the point of my concern that in today's news, where you're talking about working together with the federal and the state and the local, what impact would the government shutdown, federal government shutdown, and the FDA, how would that affect public health and issues like this that we're discussing tonight?
That's a very good question. Right now, I'm not sure which part of our federal government shut down or not, and I think the FDA, I'm not sure the FDA is shut down.
Oh, the FDA is definitely shut down.
The FDA
It's
is
making my job very hard.
The FDA is shut, National
Significant
Institutes of
part.
Health, all of these.
If I can give at least a flavor, and maybe we should talk, and I could try to bring something more specific and substantive to the town meeting, but I will say that I started life as a physicist, where you could go to the lab and just tinker a lot, and it took years for me to wrap my head around how much quality and safety was baked into the systems in the biological sciences, and in later stage research, where I spend more time now, quality systems are all baked in because you need to bring it proactively to the FDA, and you don't want them to ask a single question. You want to document things so beautifully that that you're not going to have that trouble. And even if the FDA has furloughed 41% of its workforce, they're calling a few back now. There are some things you hear about in the news, like they're not inspecting breweries, so you might not have your batch of microbrew next month. That's a big problem.
That's a huge problem.
But the pharma companies and the biotech companies are still executing on all these quality systems because later when they bring something forward, they're going to have to show all the work.
It's bigger than that too, right? Because even the smallest company has international aspirations, and just because our government might be closed, the rest of the world's governments are open, and the expectations are sometimes more stringent on us when we go to other economies. But we still have to meet those.
I can assure you, I've worked for Big Pharma for much of my career, and that is Big Pharma is not changing any of their quality control, anything what they do, for many, many reasons. One, for legal, for the fact that these are all altruistic companies, as someone else mentioned before, and they will never compromise these types of things. But as the shutdown continues, I don't know what type of administrative impact it will be, but I can assure you, or at least I personally believe, none of these companies will do anything different than they're doing now.
I'm sure they won't. But I just wanted to bring up the topic just to bring it out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
for
you
your
very
time.
much.
Good job again.
Good question, thank you.
I won't be as long as Tom. Dan DiTucci, Precinct 6. When this does go to town meeting, don't bring it up at 11:15. You're going to probably need at least one full town meeting for this.
Article 2.
Article 2.
It's on Article 2.
Make sure you got plenty of time. We got a lot of office space in town now, old office space, that could be reconstructed. Some of it is in the Water Resource District. I'm visualizing some of them now along certain areas of town that are really not even being used anymore. So what happens with, in the bylaw when this is written, level 1, level 2, allowed in water resource districts?
By special permit,
Yes.
by special permit, which
But-
is,
No, I just wanted, actually, I was going to point
I'm
directly
talking
to
about
you.
office space that's within, just
But
100 feet.
But I think it's important to note, because the comment about the threat to the water supply, that life sciences in general and the Water Resource District, the threats of the past, and Dr. Weiner can speak about them immensely, and the concerns we had in the past about water resource and water supply, it sounds like, and I'd like the panel to answer, that those concerns don't exist as they ever did in the past, and may be non-existent today for concerns within those districts. So I'll let you answer.
I will say special permit, so it does get a tacit full review by the Board of Health. What we had in town were companies that released all of their waste right into septic systems and right into our water in huge amounts of volumes. First of all, as we heard over and over, much of what goes on now is almost nanotechnology, 10 to the -9, tiny bits of material. It is all collected. There is nothing that leaves the building, nothing that leaves usually the room, nothing in most cases that leave even the washer machine shaped protein synthesizer. It's there. There is no threat that I see right now with regulations or what we do in place
Right.
that will have an effect on our
So
water
on
supply.
that note, because we're always talking about speedy approval, and I agree with that. So now we have a lab science, biotech type use that wants to come into town, and it is not in a water resource district. So that means it would not require a special permit under this new bylaw, or are you going to try to make all of the uses?
No, most every use in most areas are special permit. There is only one area in town, may I?
Yes.
That is not under special permit, and that is an area which includes, let me see if I get it right, Oracle, the Marriott, and what's the other?
The Hilton
The
Garden.
Hilton Gardens. And we don't expect any biotech in those areas. So we're pretty much covered with special permit. Now, what does a special permit means? It allows the professionals in the Board of Health and the Board of Health to just look at the plans in general, specifically what they need to do to meet the zoning requirements and the requirements, many times in federal as well as local, and just provide them with that. What happens usually is the planning board works very closely with the Board of Health. They bring it to us, we look at it for 1 week, we get it right back to them, and we move on. This is not a long process. Mr. Kelly has been involved in this for years and years with us. We move it through very, very quickly. They incorporate any questions we have, they incorporate any concerns we may have, and then we move on. Just because it's a special permit does not mean it takes a month.
Okay, right, that's what I wanted to
It means it's usually a week, and maybe we could even do better with that.
There's also, I point to a provision with biotechnology that was passed in 2012 when we actually introduced biotechnology in the bylaw that requires that if the Board of Health denies any application for any reason or even recommends denial, that the planning board would have to deny that permit as well. So there's a direct link between the review of the Board of Health and the planning board decision that for this type of industry that doesn't exist for anything else. In other commenting, of course, we include all the comments, but for this particular industry and biotechnology, there's specific oversight from the Board of Health that must be passed.
I'm just talking about, we're
that
talking
level.
about a speedy approval here.
Yep.
And we don't know whether or not there's going to be a company that wants to come into town and says, we have to go through all this before you come in, and part of it's a special permit process. I've been a town meeting member long enough to know that sometimes that can go on and on and on and on, and we don't want some company to say, I'm not in this, I'm not going to be trying to put this through over a period of a year because it's just too much time. So we should have something in place right away for those areas that I know of, that these office buildings are just, really, they're not even performing anymore. They're underperforming areas, and these are the type of areas that could be used greatly for this type of reconstruction to fit the biotech. And one last question, is there such thing as shared space with these small biotech companies? Are you visualizing a property owner or somebody wanting to have a large building, like 300,000 or 400,000 square feet, where there may be multiple tenants in that building? Are those things?
Yeah, it's very, very common for these buildings to
It does
have
happen. So that way
multi-tenant,
if
like
the-
an office building.
So if that particular large building, like just take Millipore out of the equation for a minute, just say there's one particular area where a person says, I got 250 or 300,000 square feet, so I would like to make the whole thing biotech ready, like office workspace, that's the big thing now. So in other words, you don't have to necessarily have just one use, but if it's big enough, you could say, I'm looking for 10, 12 of these uses all to come in under the one umbrella of that particular special permit and that one zoning, which makes it a lot easier for these people to come in. That's all.
Yes.
That also is good for us because it allows for collaboration, right? Science doesn't happen in a vacuum, and we need to, and I don't know everything, and we want to make sure that we have access to all those things.
Thank you.
Thank you, great question.
Planning Board Member Covino.
Yes, Planning Board Member Covino, and also a member of the Zoning Bylaw Review Committee on this item. I had a question and a comment. Question is, you were talking about the building would be part office and part lab. Would the person in the lab also have an office? Do we have to count him? On the planning board, if we were trying to figure out how many people in this building, therefore how many parking spaces, and we counted lab space and office space differently, is the fellow in the lab also have an office? Would we be counting that? Yes, no, maybe? I'm not even sure who the...
It could change day by day, tenant by tenant.
But
You may not have a defined plan that shows office and lab. I mean, I really think that it makes the process more cumbersome, and it doesn't align with the way the industry works. Is delineating between office and lab and counting people, because that's just not the way the industry works and flows.
I think, though, to answer the question of how many people are going to be driving their car to work, in any I think every situation I can think of, the lab workers have an office or a cubicle to sit at, because inevitably you're going to have bench work and you're going to have paperwork.
And then my other, and it's just an overall comment, listening, trying to be objective. Our neighbors are attracting these businesses now, Lexington, Bedford, wherever. But we have the amenities, so they are driving through this town to use our amenities. So if those buildings were here instead of there, we would have the same, if not less, traffic. Just a comment.
And
Exactly
revenue.
right. And you capture more of the economic upside of many of the attributes you already have paid for.
Thank you.
Jack Kelly, Planning Board. You mentioned very beginning, none of these uses are prohibited now. They can do them now. The only reason they would come for the life science exemption is for an FAR change. So I guess my question is, not all labs have the same ratio of people per 1,000 square feet. There will be some who would want a 1.0, some who would be happy with a 5.0 based upon their use. That's the business, but the building developer, if they're going to be investor built, you want the maximum to apply to as many clients as possible. But as we're taking baby steps here, we, as the town, want to know if we adopt a bylaw, what are we going to get? And right now, we don't know for sure. With an FAR of a max of 5.0, we know we're not going to get too much. If we jump right to a 1 or a 1.2, we may get more than what we bargained for. So I agree it's a step in the right direction, and we'll find out in the future if we want to step further. But I do think with an FAR of 0.50, there is a certain segment of the market we will still attract because they don't need all that space, or they know they're going to have a higher density of people per 1,000 square foot than some other particular one. So I don't think by undershooting your number that we're placing ourselves out of the market. We're just limiting ourselves to what portion of the market we will appeal to, and we can evaluate that in the future going forward.
So I think one of the things that I've learned from the panel discussion tonight is there should be a little bit more of an understanding of the dynamics between a life science company in a building, between the office space and the lab space, that, as mentioned, that it shouldn't be, office here, lab here, and really start putting the calculations separate for each one, whereas it sounds like there's a really tight dynamic between office space, lab space, and that it could kind of change and evolve as company does different things, has more washing machines, less washing machines. So we should be looking at it not in terms of the life science lab space gets this particular FAR, but the dynamic of the whole building potentially is at that 0.5 FAR, rather than the mix right now, as noted, and I would agree, if when you look at the mix, if it's 50-50, you're still only increasing it to maybe 0.4 something, which is what's on the ground now, or even 0.3, instead of actually getting a building with the dynamic mix of office and lab at the 0.5. You have to be 100% lab to get to the 0.5. So as we're taking baby steps to kind of understand and get there, we need to be thinking about the building as a whole, not compartmentalizing the office and lab spaces kind of individually. Seems like what I'm hearing this evening. And we should learn a little bit more about that dynamic. So to give a little bit more comfort, so if we do increase that number, that the impacts are not going to be greater than we expected. So I don't know if anyone else has comments at that point, but I was pleased to understand that a little bit more. So we're after 8 o'clock. I appreciate everyone staying a little bit longer. I know it's been a really dynamic discussion. I was very nervous that we did get through the panel by 7 to end at 7:30. I want to thank all the panelists, Dr. Parsons, Dr. Auclair, Mr. St. Clair, Dr. Weiner. Thank you so much for being here. I've never had so many PhDs on a panel. But, you know, I hope this is the beginning of a much longer conversation, and I hope, you know, even, you know, the 4 of us, the 5 of us can work a lot more together, because I think we all have a piece in this puzzle and can figure out the best way to march forward. So I want to thank the panelists.
Thank you.
And thank you,
Thank you.
everyone in the audience and in our viewing audience, if we have a large viewing audience.
If you're in Burlington,
Thank you.
Yeah.